We are thrilled to have you all with us. My name is Russell Krumnow. I'm Vice President of Programs at Convergence, and it's my job just to briefly kick us off as we move into today's program, which is in service of launching a new Convergence Dialogue. So you're going to hear from some experts today on some really critical and important national issues, and our project leader, most importantly, who's going to be taking us through the discussion as we launch the Convergence Dialogue on pathways to better jobs. So we'll get to that discussion in just a second. I'm going to very briefly set the stage with a bit of context about our work here at Convergence for those who don't already know about us. But we're thrilled to have you with us today. Definitely continue to utilize the chat as you're already starting to do by telling us where you're zooming in from. And of course, also throughout the event, you can drop resources and comments and questions there. And the team on the Convergence side will be weaving those in as we're able to the discussion so we can get to some of the comments and questions you're sharing in the chat. There's also a live transcript available for those who could utilize that feature. If your Zoom app is current and up to date, there's a CC button at the bottom of the screen that you can click, which would activate the captions feature if you would like to utilize that. During today's event, you're going to be hearing from some people who are working on these really important issues around accessing quality employment and increasing upward economic mobility for all, especially low and moderate wage workers. That is the thrust of the Convergence Dialogue on pathways to better jobs. The dialogue just started a few days ago with its first meeting of its stakeholders. And now today is sort of our public-facing launch where we have a chance to really engage in a public discussion about these issues. I want to quickly set some context about who we are. Convergence is a 13-year-old nonprofit organization that successfully over those years has brought people together in a collaborative problem-solving dialogue to action model on a range of important national issues that feel stuck or that feel like the right people are not working together to solve those problems. What we bring that's a unique value add is this dialogue model where we convene people across lines of difference, ideological difference, critically sectoral difference, which is also important, and many other ways in which folks differ, geographic diversity, et cetera. We bring them together in a very intentional facilitated dialogue process to excavate the issues, to better understand each other, and critically over the course of the dialogue meetings, to build trust and to build a set of solutions that can make a difference on the issue that the entire group can support, despite their own differences and varying approaches. So this project, like the others we've led, will endeavor to do so. As I said, just a few days ago, that dialogue process started with its first meeting. This work on the Pathways to Better Jobs dialogue is really building on some work on economic mobility and opportunity that Convergence has been leading for a few years. So to briefly put this in context, we have a couple of past projects that this project is really building on. I came on board about 6 years ago at Convergence to lead a project called Working Up that was aimed at increasing economic mobility for all through work. And we convened a very diverse table that looked at that challenge in an incredibly broad way, looking at financial security, looking at workforce pipelines, looking at job quality. That project resulted in a number of important recommendations and critically was able to knit together some people in the space that had not worked together before. It also was able in the short term to have some really positive impacts on some of the major employers participating, including Walmart, who work with the folks participating in the dialogue to help craft an internal opportunity agenda that impacted many of its workers. So we were really gratified to see some really short-run impacts from that original dialogue that impacted the largest private sector workforce in the country through some of the investments Walmart was making in its workers around career ladders, around schedule predictability, around access to higher education support. Then as the pandemic started in 2020, some of the folks who sat at that original table came back together, wanted to be reconvened with some additional voices Convergence added for a set of conversations that were during that very acute phase of the pandemic. That work also critically had some really great short-run impacts. It brought people together who were working on some of the relief packages on Capitol Hill, but also critically, it helped us refine our approach going forward at Convergence with regard to this signal challenge of closing the opportunity gap in America and making sure everybody, no matter what zip code you're born in, has a chance at the American dream. We know that is not currently the case for everybody, and we believe that it's a critical and important challenge that has huge ripple effects for our democracy, for alienation, and interlocks with other challenges the country is facing. So we brought some folks back together in 2020 that helped us set a path toward really two projects in the economic opportunity space and helped us design the framing. One of those is the project you're learning about today, which we're going to now focus on. The other one is a project focused more on supports for working families. So we want you to know that in parallel to the project we're discussing today, there's another dialogue that's still in its landscape analysis and research phase, focusing more on family supports, things like childcare, paid leave, the child tax credit, and other critical supports that can help especially low and moderate income families get over the hurdle of having and raising and supporting young kids in America, which we know is difficult and expensive. In conversation with those challenges is the project we're focusing on today. And so now we'll get to the discussion that you came here for, which is to learn more about the Pathways to Better Jobs project that's launching. This issue is so critical, as you all know. These are longstanding challenges. We know for a long time in America, there have been workers in frontline and hourly wage work that did not have a clear route to income mobility over time. And surviving the month and surviving their monthly expenses was about the best that they could sort of hope for. There are a number of efforts going on in this space, but we also know that the pandemic really disrupted and exacerbated many of those pre-existing challenges. So this dialogue has an opportunity to exist the long run challenge and to speak to the sort of acute challenges brought on by the pandemic that's disrupted the lives of so many low and moderate wage workers and families who were the most likely to be facing difficult choices on trade-offs during the health phase of the pandemic, that acute phase. They were also the most likely to lose jobs or to try to re-enter and to find better paying jobs. And so this is the population we're really centering on, which is workers in the bottom half of the income distribution. Given our track record, given our work on these issues, we are thrilled to bring leaders together around these challenges today. And so with that, I'm going to bring in the director of the Convergence Dialogue on Pathways to Better Jobs, who's leading the project and who's going to lead today's panel discussion with our fantastic panel of experts. That's Anita Chandramohan. We're thrilled to have her on board on the staff, and we're thrilled to have her leading today's discussion. Anita brings extensive history in this issue area. She's worked directly with marginalized communities and individuals to improve their economic well-being and to work on increased skilling across various sectors and geographies. She's worked closely with community organizers, labor groups, business groups, workforce development groups, many of the exact sectors we're convening in this dialogue. Prior to joining us here at Convergence just a few months ago, Anita spent several years overseeing career development, digital skills, and program evaluation initiatives at the International Rescue Committee in Seattle, and she has extensive workforce experience prior to that as well. I do want to note we have a fantastic panel joining Anita for today, and Dr. Goldsmith in particular, we want to mention, was a mentor to Convergence's own David Eisner, our CEO, back when he was leading some important initiatives during the Bush administration. So we're thrilled that that relationship has continued forward and that Steve is joining us for the discussion today. Anita, I'll hand it to you to jump in. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Russell. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I'm very excited to launch this dialogue publicly. As part of a landscape analysis, my team conducted over 130 interviews during the assessment phase of this project. This really helped shape the dialogue framing. At the heart of the issue, as Russell mentioned, is the fact that millions of job seekers are unable to access and navigate tools, resources, and opportunities to obtain and move into new, improved, and stable avenues of employment. This problem raises significant questions about the efficacy and efficiency of workforce systems, accountability, accessible education and skilling, and rethinking a paradigm that benefits employers and workers alike. And we will get into some of these very critical topics and questions in just a moment. Through the dialogue itself, we're going to be focusing on short, medium, and long-term solutions to address industry and worker communication pain points and perceptions that prioritize certain types of jobs, degrees, and skills within our current national workforce. The hope is to find a better way to connect workers with appropriate opportunities to build their skills and qualifications, and to navigate the on-ramps and off-ramps that will help to build economic mobility and bring financial security for them and their families. The framing paper should now be in the chat, and I encourage you to read through it and learn more about how we're going to be approaching this complex and very layered topic. As Russell mentioned, we have a fabulous panel of speakers who will be joining us today, and I'm joined by three unique voices in the field to discuss all of the things I just mentioned, the complexity and nuance of our dialogue on pathways to better jobs. We are joined today by Dr. Stephen Goldsmith, Derek Bach Professor of the practice of urban policy and the director of the Data Smart Cities program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He recently published a book titled Growing Fairly: How to Build Opportunity and Equity in Workforce Development, co-authored by Kate Markin Coleman, who sits on the opposite side of the political spectrum of Steve and also happens to be his wife. We're also joined by Dr. Rose-Margaret Ekeng-Itua, Professor of Engineering and Program Director of the Smart Manufacturing Technology Program at Ohlone College, located in Fremont, California, and Della Adams, Upward Academy Program Manager at Tyson Foods, a very large employer, a very large global employer with a lot of presence across the United States. Thank you all for joining us here today. And before we dive in, I do want to let all attendees know that we hope to take questions throughout the discussion. So there's no need to necessarily wait until the end. And as our discussion unfolds, please ask questions in the chat, and I will do my best to elevate those and weave them into our discussion overall and to the group. Also want to highlight that we are live tweeting the event. If you want to follow along now or later to see that coverage on Twitter, and the link for that is also now in the chat. Wonderful, so let's dive in. To start, I'd like to ask the panelists here with us today, can you please share with us a little bit more about how your individual work intersects with economic mobility and pathways to better jobs? First, maybe I will ask Dr. Rose-Margaret if you want to get us started.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Anita. It's a pleasure to be here with amazing fellow panelists. Like Anita introduced, I'm a professor of engineering at Ohlone College and also the program director for the Smart Manufacturing Technology program. I really got into workforce development out of my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I firmly believe that workforce development and economic development is true DEI work, because that is the only way that we can bridge the socioeconomic gap. And so to that, in that regard, I am also the PI, the principal investigator for a National Science Foundation grant for smart manufacturing education in the Silicon Valley. And that grant seeks to provide internship opportunities to community college students. And also as the director for the Northern California Engineering Technology Apprenticeship Pathways, we seek to develop pathways in the state of California, focusing initially in the northern region of California for apprenticeships. And so these are some of the work that I've done currently, and a few that you'll hear about that I've done in the past that intersects with a better jobs program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rose-Margaret. Della, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, hi. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for having us, for having Tyson Foods represented here in this wonderful panel. I really wanted to start, well, I guess, you know, for me, I started as an ESL instructor inside our plants many years ago, working directly with our frontline team members, and then sort of branched from there, grew into now managing our education and training programs inside our about 60 of our plants. And so I really kind of wanted to start talking about the context, Tyson's context as a whole. We've got 120,000 frontline team members. 60% of those are immigrant and refugees. And then in that 60%, about 10% are internationally trained professionals. So folks who come from countries and they already have their degrees or their credentials. And then on the other side of that spectrum, we've got a 12% who are non-literate even in their first language. So a huge disparity between, you know, the skill level of our frontline workforce. So we're committed to creating pathways, career pathways, really building bridges from, you know, those for those low skilled folks to upskill into higher paying and higher skilled jobs.
Thank you so much, Della. We're really excited to hear more about Tyson's innovative initiatives around helping employees engage in skilling opportunities and moving up in pathways. And last but not least, I'll turn it over to Dr. Stephen Goldsmith. Oops, I think you might be on mute.
I think I think we can just use Steve for purposes. It'll save several seconds in the conversation. First of all, thanks for having me. Let me make a couple introductory comments. It was a little bit of exaggeration to call me a mentor to David Eisner. We did work together. I want to start with that moment, though, which was the moment of AmeriCorps and Vista, where David led AmeriCorps and Vista with some help from me. And as we worked on this book, my spouse, Kate, and I, and interviewed people across the country for over 2 years, it's remarkable how many leaders of major nonprofits are AmeriCorps or Vista alums, right? So people who begin in the areas of service, continue in the areas of service. And throughout this conversation, that's what this is really about, right? Service on behalf of folks finding economic mobility, fairness, and equity. So we spent, I run this program at Harvard mostly for government officials. My spouse was former EVP and co-author of the National YMCA. So the issue we looked at was kind of cross-sector collaboration. How would you bring together a system, right and left politically, but more importantly, sectoral government, for-profit, nonprofit, enlightened companies like Tyson's and the like to accomplish these goals. So we interviewed folks. We identified 10 principles upon which we thought the system could work, principles that required an intermediary, government leadership, nonprofits, wraparound services, personalized services, all based on and informed by data. So that 2 years was pretty invigorating because we found plenty of solutions. The only issue is how you bring them together at scale. And this particular point in time where we have such a mismatch between labor needs and labor availability struck us as a perfect time to provide economic mobility for those who haven't had a fair chance in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen. Really excited to hear more about some of the research that you and Kate did and how that might be contributing to the conversation we're having today, and some best practices and existing challenges that are continuing to be exacerbated as well on a lot of facets of this issue. So to kind of jump into the meat of the questions, one of the areas that we often see is very challenging to kind of come to consensus on is, where does societal responsibility and accountability lie to start to solve some of these challenges that we're seeing? And I would like to ask the panel members, how do we think about accountability in the short and long terms from different industries and from different perspectives? And what role or financial obligation do the public and private sectors have to ensure better pathways for workers? And I will say, feel free to jump in wherever you feel fit and respond to each other's comments as well.
So
well, you might have to call on us. I think we ought to go in the same order. I'll defer. Can I call you Rose-Margaret? Is that okay? Or you?
It's okay. I think Della wanted to say something.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Della,
Right.
yeah.
I was just trying to fill the silence. So yeah, I can go ahead and jump in. I mean, Tyson, we're in the communities that we're in, we're one of the largest employer in many of the Tyson communities, if not the largest employer in many communities. And so we have a real, we have a responsibility to keep people employed. We have a responsibility to, ensure that the economy of these communities keeps running. We have a responsibility to create jobs, not only within our plant, but also, secondary suppliers. And we also have what we feel is a critical responsibility to matriculate new Americans into areas that maybe weren't as easily accessible before. So really bringing diversity to many communities that maybe before were, dying off just because folks were moving to cities. So, I mean, we also financially, we invest millions of dollars every year through grants to local organizations in our Tyson communities. And so, that might serve some Tyson employees, but it also just helps strengthen that community, maybe through grants through immigrant serving organizations or through schools, or maybe environmental as well. So that's really, we really take that responsibility very seriously, to not only better what we know is good for our business, but we also obviously what is just good for society as a whole.
Well, you could probably the easiest way to answer your question is all of the above. I mean, really, but that doesn't get you a point where things work well. So let's just let me step back and think about in the following ways. First of all, maybe the word's accountability, but maybe there is a point here of enlightened self-interest. And convergence stands for bringing people together, converging on a solution. So if you live in an urban area that's been neglected, then folks in that community deserve an opportunity for a job. If you live in a wealthy suburban neighborhood and you're going to look at what's going on now, you have both an ethical and moral obligation to those folks, but even more importantly, from your own perspective, enlightened self-interest will say helping folks get a job in a period of labor shortage is in the best interest of the region itself. So let's look at the region and begin with this idea that we need to create a narrative that brings people together that helps us produce those solutions. So that's one way. I'm a former government official, mayor, deputy mayor of New York. So I look to government leadership, and there's definitely a federal role and a state and local role. At the local level, I think we could say there is a responsibility on the part of elected officials to convene the stakeholders to create a better system. And that means that the nonprofits have to be there, the philanthropist has to be there. At the federal level, and to some extent the local level, there are a set of conditions for which government needs to be responsible that need to be met, or people can't get jobs. If they can't get a ride to work, they're not going to be able to work. If it takes an hour and a half and 3 bus transfers to get to work, they can't get to work. If they don't have childcare, they can't get to work. If they're scared in their neighborhoods and they have very little social capital in their neighborhoods and they can't get out and meet folks in the neighborhoods, that is a responsibility of government to produce safe neighborhoods, walkable spaces, and healthy atmospheres. All of that affects the development of an individual. So I'd say all of the above. Now, that enlightened self-interest, and sorry to talk so long, I promise not to do this again, but we do have 10 principles. I have one principle I'll answer for each of your questions, so I'm about done with the 10. So if you look at the employer, I'd say, the employer has enlightened self-interest as well, and I like Della's answer, but if you're an employer and you need jobs, then maybe you ought to look at how to use skills. There are many of the chapters we used wrote about in the book used data, MZ burning glass data, to identify skillscapes so that employers can advertise for skills, hire for skills, train for skills, rather than requiring 2 or 4 year degrees as the prerequisite for every job, which in and of itself discriminates. So I'd say the employers, the government, the individuals, the nonprofits, but there needs to be leadership. To me, that leadership needs to be regionally a combination of nonprofit and government leaders.
And I really love Steve's response and Della's response, and I'll just piggyback off both of them. And I completely agree with you, Steve. I think that accountability lies with government, with educational institutions, and also with employers. And I think that we really get the most out of the system when the 3 parties come together to work together to look for solutions for workforce development. And I'll start with education first because I'm a professor, I'm an educator. I think that in the wake of COVID-19, we have had to really have a paradigm shift with regards to the way that we provide training. We've had to pivot towards virtual learning, and that is here to stay. And I think what we have also seen is that also in the wake of COVID-19, lots of sectors have been hardly impacted. For example, tourism, transportation, hospitality. And so as an educational institution, Ohlone College stepped in with our Smart Manufacturing Technology program to retrain and upskill individuals that were in hospitality sector and tourism sector that were hard hit into sectors like manufacturing that was thriving thriving in the peak of the pandemic. And so I think that educational institutions need to look at ways that we can provide the necessary training that industry requires or the community requires in various modalities. And I have to say that the virtual modality seems to be here to stay, but of course we also have issues around that, which is the digital divide, which probably we'll talk about later on. And then for employers, I think employers, to your point, Steve, need to start looking at various ways to really increase diversity. And having that paradigm shift from looking at traditional four-year degrees are great. I've got a PhD and it's wonderful, but the country is starving of entry-level technicians, and I speak for the manufacturing sector. And so we've got to start looking at how can we really get folks from high schools straight into the system. Look at the European model that seems to work well. Straight from high school, individuals are getting into the workforce. And I want to use Tesla as an example, and Tesla is working with Ohlone College currently to work on a manufacturing development program. And that program is going to be getting high school individuals, high school students to train in smart manufacturing. And Tesla is working around the scheduling, which is another thing that employers need to look at to move away from the traditional hours of work, traditional shifts in manufacturing, traditional everybody needs to be on site, to other modalities of working that is more accommodating for the generation that exists now. And so the MDP program that Tesla is working with Ohlone College on is going to be a 10-week program. We are going to churn out a 1-year certificate of achievement in smart manufacturing in 10 weeks. And Tesla will pay these individuals to come get trained 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And then after that, they get into the workforce, but they're getting paid. The education tuition is being covered. And I think if employers take this sort of responsibility like Tesla is doing, I think that will really help start moving things in the right direction. And then for government, and I think after this I'll stop talking, but just working together with the workforce development boards is crucial. So yes, there's federal government, the state government, but I think local government, especially when it comes to the workforce boards, it's extremely crucial that the workforce boards work closely with educational institutions and employers to really start creating a pipeline. And even in terms of tapping into some of the funding that they have, for example, we had an Earn and Learn program, and we worked closely with our workforce development boards to provide dollars for training of individuals that were dislocated by COVID-19. And I can talk about this much later, but to your question, Anita, accountability, the responsibility lies with educational institutions, government, and employers, and coming together to work together to figure this out.
I'd like to say another couple of words, and this conversation is just fantastic. So again, just happy to be here. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything that y'all are saying. You know, definitely, it's everybody coming together, right? And so we really find too, like, the barriers of Steve, like you were talking about earlier, you know, just barriers around transportation, around childcare. And then of course, like that huge education piece, you know, that is so much of what our work here at Tyson Foods is focused on. We partnered with Enterprise to create van pools to get folks to the plant. So that is rolling out all across the country. And then we're also piloting childcare services for our frontline team members. So right next to the plant, so you can go take your kid to the child. Many team members that's what Tyson employees are called, our team members. You can't find childcare for second shift, right? Like, you go to work in the evening and there's not a daycare that's open. So that's a huge barrier for folks if they don't have family that they can rely on. So we're actually piloting and investing millions into creating childcare facilities right next to the plant that are open during second shift. You can drop your kid off, you know that they're safe, know that they're well cared for, and it's right there next to the plant. And it is all being funded on behalf of Tyson, so they're paying, very little money to have their child in the childcare facility. So that's a couple of things that we're doing that we're finding really help, just like trying to take down those barriers for folks to be able to get to work, and then while they're at work, right, providing those educational services inside the plant, on site. They don't have to go to a community college down the road. The community college sends an instructor to the plant to be able to work there on site. So really, again, as convenient as possible. And then really making it contextualized learning. So you're learning something that is relevant to you, that is relevant to getting that higher skilled job that's available. And so that's, just some key ways that we're trying to solve these really, really difficult problems.
Yeah, and Anita, if I just may respond to Della's comment about just having in situ training. And I think that is a model that we found worked in our Earn and Learn program, where we had in situ training. The community college, we went there and we trained the folks while they were working, and they got paid for their training. And that is another important component, that employers need to pay individuals for the time that they do participate in training. That model works.
So Anita, there are a number of kind of important issues that the last two speakers just mentioned quickly. Let me just call them out for a second. One is contextualized learning. I mean, the idea that a student, a young person, has to go to take remedial reading or math means they have to sit in the penalty room. And if they're a young mom or something, that doesn't come without a cost, and nor is it fair. So if you think about, maybe they don't have the math and reading skills they need. In the book, we saw some examples of this in Houston, for example, that where an electrical contractor needed folks, but they need to have certain skills. Well, if they can learn those basic educational requirements in the context of the work, they're not only more interested, but they accelerate their path to a job. So that comment by Della was really important, and Rose-Margaret's comments similarly. And so if you think about how we identify the skills necessary and who provides that training, it could be the employer, but it could be a training provider. Well, a training provider needs to provide the skills that, I mean, Rose-Margaret, you're better at this than I am, just because, both because you sound better and because it's your job. But, how do you use data to identify a person who may be conscientious but doesn't have manufacturing tool and die skills? And how do you create a discrete module that will train them on that work? It doesn't have to be 2-year college or 4-year college for them to get started. And so piecing these things together, bridges to work from apprentice programs that you mentioned, that's terribly important because people need money while they learn and they work. So all of the answers here thread the sectors together. That's really what I wanted to call out.
Thank you, Steve. Rose-Margaret, Della, I feel like your answers are really all really creating a wonderful cohesion around the types of investments that we need to make in our society, and also really kind of lifting up a bunch of gaps that we see as well. And I want to kind of tack on a question which touches on a couple of things you all mentioned, as well as some of the comments and questions made in the chat as well, around digital redlining, digital divides, and how we approach gaps in demographics that we feel like don't get enough investment, and in communities and individuals who we feel like are traditionally marginalized in a lot of ways, but then because of this digital divide have really been exacerbated over the last few years. And we're going to see likely that gap continue to grow. And so I have a question to you all around how we should approach increased investment in adult education and training, particularly around digital skill education, thinking about things like digital access, broadband access, but also opportunities for skilling for adult learners in particular. We see so much investment in K through 12, opportunity youth, but once someone is perhaps 25 and over, they really find it very difficult to access and be eligible for a lot of training programs out there, particularly in the digital skill transformation area. And I know Tyson has been working on this quite a lot, but I'd be curious to hear from all of you around how you feel like we can improve investment in these areas and really intentionally tackle the digital redlining and digital skill gap that exists.
Who wants to go first? Okay,
Rose-Margaret, I'll let you step in, Rose-Margaret.
Okay, sure, thank you. I can share a few thoughts regarding this, because I think that this is really at the crux of the issue that we face currently in workforce development. Anita, you mentioned K-12 and then the adult sector, and you're absolutely right. A typical K-12 institution or person coming out of the K-12 system right now is a digital citizen for the most part. They know how to use their iPhones. They're growing up with technology for the most part. Yes, there's still some barriers that exist in K-12, which I'll talk about later, but just moving to the adult learner, that is where we really see the barrier here. The folks that are 24 and over, those are the barriers that exist. For example, if we go to adult schools and we wanted to support the individuals in the adult school to get into industry, immediately we face the digital barrier. We had a program that we had, our Earn and Learn program, and we're focusing on some of the individuals in the adult school. It is difficult for them to participate in virtual training. So even understanding how to navigate Canvas, some even understanding how to turn on a laptop, how to send an email. And so embedded in our training and an onboarding process for any workforce development program, there needs to be digital literacy embedded, both at the employer end and also the training end or the skill provider end. Typically, employers will do their typical onboarding, hey, this is the company, etc. There needs to be intentionality around actually embedding digital training or digital literacy in the onboarding process. And that is why what we're also finding out in our programs. And so, for example, at Ohlone, we'll have little 0.5 units or non-credit courses that help support individuals to become a little bit more digital literate. And with so doing, then they can then participate in virtual training. But if they are not digitally literate, they cannot participate in any virtual training. And then stepping back a little bit more, because oftentimes we think, oh, well, people just are not digitally literate because they don't have a laptop. Stepping back, I want to say that the onus also lies with tech institutions to make sure that when they're testing out educational software, that there's diversity around the table. It is not because the people, Black, brown people, or women are just not savvy with technology. The problem is that when the testing is going on, those individuals are not represented around the table. And so that is really at the root cause of the issue, that we need to have representation in development of those technologies and representation when testing is going on. But I mean, we could go on and on and on about the digital divide and digital redlining. And data even shows that geographically, there has been, I'm not sure if it's systemic system that has actually redlined certain geographical areas. And if you look at those geographical areas, they tend to be areas that have been historically marginalized, where you have lots of people of color. And so we need to really look into why are we having that redlining, even in our K-12 systems, and really look at how to systemically solve that. But that is a really big issue we've got to deal with.
We've been doing a ton of work on this here at Tyson. We have, we've been doing a couple of things. My boss, Anson Green, has been doing a lot of work around the Digital Equity Act and making sure that all of our educational partners across the country are aware that, that it exists, that funding is coming, and making sure that, we can, that the educational providers can tap into that funding so that we can use it for adult learners, right? Making sure, because there's funding available. We just need to make sure that it gets in the hands of the experts in adult education. So that's one thing, just kind of sounding the alarm with all of our partners across the country. And then also, we have this lens here at Tyson. We're a huge company, right? We're an international company. We've got 140,000 workers total. So we have systems in place, particularly in HR, that folks need to be able to log into. And once you log into the Tyson system, you have access to your pay stubs and to your benefits and to request time off and to do all of the other things, right? But we're seeing that, of course, that many of our frontline team members, many of those who are immigrant and refugee, who have actually never touched a computer before in their lives, feel very uncomfortable with technology. They don't have the skills to log in to the Tyson system. So we have been developing an educational curriculum right around these very fundamental issues of creating a username, creating a complex password. Like those two things alone open up so much for a person, right? Like not only within Tyson, but also to log into their school account to see their kids' grades, or to, order stuff on Amazon, or, there's so many things that, that folks will be able to tap into once they just have the foundational skills of logging in to a system. So that's what we're really, really focused on here, just very, very discrete, very foundational skills, and then really being able to build off of those. Once they can log in, well, then they can log into this training system and take contextualized English courses, or, so many opportunities, right? But so that's really what we're really trying to focus on here.
And Steve, just want to give you an opportunity to respond to either of the comments that were just made around the digital equity divide conversation before launching into the next question.
Well, I thought the answers were good enough. I don't have anything to add to them. So let me pretend to answer your question and answer a different question at the same time. So a related issue, right? So there are a lot of reasons why folks don't have skills. The next question is, how do we, if we overcome the technological barriers, then what happens? And so I want to kind of turn the answer a little bit and say the following. Most folks who are underemployed or unemployed don't think that the system is fair, and 7 of 10 of them have something holding them back from taking the next step. So if we think about systems and nonprofits lifting folks up, I got this research from Strata. Then 46% of the people think the system is unfair to me. 46% think the employer won't pay me what I'm worth. 44% don't have the right skills. Obviously, there's people in more than one category. So we need something that encourages people to take a step forward. That's point one. Point two is that as we study this skill and digital issue, let's not automatically assume that folks without digital skills are not going to be competent for a digital job, even a mid-skilled digital job. They may be conscientious. They may show up for work on time as a waiter or waitress in the restaurant. They may be team players, right? They may have a set of skills that are, unfortunately, some call them soft skills, but a set of skills that are kind of teamwork and personal skills. Well, the path to the future then is to encourage companies and regions. IBM does a good job of this. Walmart does a good job of this, to examine the skills that employees have and then offer discrete training that adds the digital skills and helps somebody be a mid-skilled worker. So let's think about this thing as a continuum, helping people take the first step, matching them, understanding the skills they have, having the employers hire on the basis of skills, and then plug the difference in with discrete training, and then badge those skills so we can see how people are progressing digitally.
And thank you so much, Steve, for bringing that really important point of just giving people the ability to overcome that initial inertia. And that is exactly what we've seen, especially in historically marginalized communities. There's a mental barrier there. And so supporting individuals to overcome that inertia is crucial. And in some of our programs, we've actually gotten a confidence coach to come and talk about confidence, to pump them up, and just to get our students into industry. And this has been highly successful. We've actually, I think we presented a poster on just the confidence level that increases through experiential learning, and just even being able to get them into the company to work and to do internships requires a lot of helping them to overcome mental barriers. And so to that extent, I think that the government, local, state, federal, needs to pump a lot of money into this, helping individuals from marginalized societies overcome that mental barriers, because over years, the system has said, you can't do it, you can't do it. And so that exists. And then from there, then we follow Steve's continue on gaining skills.
So that's a really important part. And I can say, you know, from the example, Steve, that you and Kate raise in your book, in terms of the programs that you're seeing having really great success and best practices, one of the aspects is that career navigation piece, that support piece, that mentorship piece. And so we certainly want to think about how we can weave those into a lot of different types of workforce and skilling and employer systems as well around the country. So we can provide people with a holistic skills support that we want to be able to have them take on to their next job and onwards as well. So shifting a little bit, I wanted to ask a question around geographical investment. And so thinking about the fact that economic opportunity and development conversations are often centralized in metro, urban, or suburban areas. And certainly there are neglected urban areas all around the country as well. But I would love to spend a couple of minutes talking about how economic development dynamics differ in more rural areas around the country, or those heightened neglected urban areas as well. And what are some key opportunities for growth and investment in terms of upward career mobility, bringing skills or jobs to those areas, particularly thinking about individuals and groups who are facing immense economic insecurity?
You might one might think about breaking your question into two parts. One, not how you meant it, and one, how you meant it. So that you have areas of dense poverty. Some may be rural, but some may be an urban neighborhood in a prosperous region, right? And both present their own sets of complexity. And I do think it's important to point out that as much as all of us who are attending today care about the workforce development system, in fact, if we did what we need to do responsibly in the neighborhoods that have been neglected, we would create more opportunity through that than we would trying to mitigate and ameliorate the problems that come later, right? If the parks worked and the schools worked and the streets were clean and the transit was acceptable and the crime violence that young adults are exposed to was reduced, right? Those issues would have remarkable differences. It's not exactly how you meant the question, but it's worth kind of coming back to that. You know, if you think about the other half of the question, and the other two panelists probably more knowledgeable about this than I am, but there is an opportunity here with hybrid work, right? Hybrid work creates a problem in some of the urban communities that produces where there's a dense population and people have traditionally kind of gone to cities to make it into the middle class. But in the rural areas now, there are great opportunities, particularly when broadband is finally equitably deployed, to have these jobs be remote. And so I think that presents an interesting opportunity as well. But it may not fit the Tyson's food model quite so much, but maybe the advanced manufacturing model a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of our Tyson plants are in rural communities. I am from a small town. Like I feel very close to, understanding the dynamic that goes on in rural communities. And I think one of the things that we do, and that's really important for us, is to there are plants in urban areas, Tyson Foods plants in urban areas, right? But one thing that we do is we try to partner with a local educational provider to provide training and education, right? So we don't actually, teach. Tyson employees don't actually teach the classes. We partner with local training, community colleges, educational providers to provide those educational services. And one thing we really think is important is to leverage the local expertise in a Tyson community. So for example, our plant in Finney, Kansas is totally different than our plant in Vineland, New Jersey. Now they may be producing similar products, but it's just a very different culture, a very different dynamic inside those two facilities. So, what we do by leveraging the local expertise, the local educational providers, we're building connections in the community, right? And we're strengthening those partnerships, and we're actually strengthening the community as a whole. Sometimes I'll jump on calls, maybe a program check-in call, and my two partners that previously did not know each other, right, until we started our program inside the plant, they have seen each other at the grocery store. Their kids go to the same school, right? It's very important to, build those partnerships, connect those folks inside their local communities, because it is a very different dynamic than what you might see in our Chicago plant or something like that. So that is something that we're really trying to do, just to make sure that our context, our perspective is not always the perspective that's in that local environment.
And I really like the point you made, Della, about just ensuring that we do respect each community. And that goes to the point of ensuring that we deconstruct the concept of assimilation, because oftentimes we want to go with an approach of assimilation. I'm from the Silicon Valley in California, and we cannot turn every single region in the country to the Silicon Valley. We do not want to do that. And so it is a case of understanding the needs of each community. And I like the partnership with local educational institutions and providing the sort of workforce that works for that community. And just ensuring that at the end of the day, what each American wants is to be able to put food on the table, take care of their families, and have a chance at the American dream. And we can all have a chance at the American dream without every single part of the country being the Silicon Valley. And that goes to deconstructing assimilation. We can't continue to assimilate every sector. We must, every community, we must respect each community and provide the sort of workforce that is suitable for each community, because we do need our rural communities.
Thank you all. I want to raise one question that had come up in the chat around, to what extent are we considering, or how should we consider the proliferation of basic jobs, basic skills jobs, and coupling that with the growing threat of technological unemployment as we look at AI models that kind of come in, are able to do a lot of these roles, particularly in manufacturing, in some type of, in other industries as well. And so just want to kind of throw that question out, maybe for a 1 minute each answer from the panelists around the automation and how we deal with that from an employment perspective.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I can just jump in real quick and say that, what our plants are very high tech environments, right? And we are automating more and more. That is opening up higher skilled, higher paying jobs. We need folks to be able to run those very high tech, that very high tech equipment. So what we're doing is taking our frontline worker that may have been doing that manually and giving them the skills training them, upskilling them to be able to get a promotion, a life-changing lift in pay many times, into those higher skilled positions. So it's automation is maybe getting rid of some of the lower skilled jobs and opening up higher skilled jobs. So it's just a matter of building a bridge from that to that higher skilled wage.
Yeah, and it's interesting you asked that question, Anita, because today I was grading papers, and one of the questions I had given my students was to talk about the ethical issues around automation and AI. And one of the students brought up unemployment, and I'm like, no, I'm going to give you 0 for that. No. Then I thought, okay, let me listen to their perspective. But to your question, automation is just like every single industrial revolution we've had in the world. When we had the first industrial revolution, everybody said, we'll never have jobs. Everyone is going to lose their jobs. We did the second, the third. Now we are in the fourth industrial revolution. And so all that is going to happen is that we are just going to learn a different way of doing things. And to Della's point, get retrained and upskilled. And that is why educational institutions like community colleges are really crucial and need to be center front in providing this type of training as we move into the next industrial revolution. And just also wanted to say that at the end of the day, automation is actually a route for diversity, to increase the diversity pipeline. I'm seeing more women interested in getting into manufacturing because it's no longer the typical dirt and grime. And so with automation, with the new wave of industrial technological revolution, we're going to see an increase in diversity in the workforce that we so desire. So I think it's a good thing, but we'll all have to get retrained, upskilled. Who would have thought that I would be producing videos? Okay, COVID made me become a video producer for my class. So we'll all learn and keep growing.
Thank you so much. And the last question before we'll head to closing remarks is around moving forward and next steps and how some of the folks in the audience can advocate for these great solutions. And so there's a question from Jillian from Civic Genius that came up for people at the grassroots level. Is there specific advocacy that folks should be doing to advance some of these great solutions that you all have been discussing?
You can advocate in terms of community narrative. You can advocate in terms of a system that works where leaders take responsibility, convene the stakeholders. You can advocate in terms of training that's more discreetly tailored for the jobs that are available. I mean, you could advocate for transportation systems that work. So whatever the area of advocacy, every piece of that's important. From my perspective and the perspective in our book, it's an advocate in behalf of a regional system. There is no workforce development system. There's a bunch of pieces of workforce that are in a region. Advocate for the system to create a system by bringing the pieces together.
Thanks, Steve. So with just a couple of minutes left, I really want to thank you all again, Steve, Della, Rose-Margaret, for such an enriching and dynamic conversation around some of the possibilities, structure, and impact of opportunity and investment that we can have around the country. Really enjoyed hearing all of your perspectives and the overlap in the work that you're doing and your approaches as well. And excited to see how we can learn from some of these solutions and questions raised as we continue the official Pathways dialogue. Also want to thank Walmart, who was a contributor in Convergence's previous dialogue, excuse me, on economic recovery, and is a current supporter and participant in our Pathways to Better Jobs dialogue, and to the Fetzer Institute as well for their convergence funding, for their funding and convergence and our initiatives. And lastly, I want to let everyone know, as Russell mentioned in the beginning, the Pathways to Better Jobs dialogue officially had our first meeting last week and brought together a select group of stakeholders from a lot of different sectors. And we're going to be forging ahead over the next 12 months and very excited to see how the dialogue unfolds. Please follow us on social media as the dialogue continues, and we'll share updates, learning opportunities, and information about future events. And we invite people to stay connected with our projects and have several ways to do that, If anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me with follow-up concerns, etc. And my email was just dropped in the chat. Thank you again for attending, and to all of our speakers, have a wonderful day.